On December 15th, 1890, Chief Sitting Bull was killed during a confrontation with Indian Agency police on the Grand River in South Dakota, marking the end of an era for the Lakota people. But let us go back in time to a day in the life of this revered leader, to a moment when the stakes were high and the future uncertain. It is the summer of 1876, and the Lakota people are gathered near the Little Bighorn River, preparing for a great battle against the U.S. Army's 7th Cavalry Regiment, led by George Armstrong Custer. The air is tense with anticipation, as the Lakota warriors, including Sitting Bull, Crazy Horse, and Gal, ready themselves for the fight ahead. The sound of drums and the smell of smoke from the cooking fires fill the air as the people prepare for the impending clash. As Sitting Bull, a holy man and leader, walks among his people, he knows that the outcome of this battle will determine the fate of his nation, and he wonders, will the Lakota people emerge victorious, or will they succumb to the relentless pressure of the U.S. Army? As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon on June 25, 1876, the household of Chief Sitting Bull began to stir. The air was crisp, with a hint of wood smoke carried on the breeze, a reminder of the fires that had burned through the night to keep the chill off. In the kitchen, a woman was already up, preparing the morning meal, a traditional Lakota dish of dried buffalo meat known as wasna, mixed with berries and wild onions. The wasna was a staple of the Lakota diet, and its preparation was a labor-intensive process that involved drying and pounding the meat into a fine powder. This powder was then mixed with fat and berries to create a nutritious and filling meal. The woman, Grey Bird, was a skilled cook, and her wasna was renowned among the tribe for its flavor and texture. She had learned the art of cooking from her mother, who had learned it from her mother before her. The recipe had been passed down through generations of Lakota women, and Grey Bird took great pride in her ability to prepare this traditional dish. As she worked, the sound of sizzling meat and the aroma of cooking food filled the air, mingling with the smell of freshly brewed coffee, a luxury item that had become increasingly available to the Lakota people through trade with European-American settlers. The coffee was a rare treat, and its aroma filled the air, enticing the rest of the household to rise and start their day. Outside, the sound of horses whinnying and the clucking of chickens could be heard as the tribe's herders and farmers began their daily tasks. The herders were paid a wage of $1.50 per day, a decent sum for the time, but one that barely covered the costs of living in a region where the buffalo herds were dwindling and the land was under threat from encroaching European-American settlement. The herders worked tirelessly to care for the horses and cattle, ensuring that they were healthy and well fed. They also worked to maintain the fences and pastures, making sure that the animals did not escape or get injured. The work was hard and labor-intensive, but it was essential to the survival of the tribe. As the morning sun rose higher in the sky, the tribe's spiritual leader, Chief Sitting Bull, emerged from his lodge, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of trouble. He was a wise and experienced leader, with a deep understanding of the natural world and the ways of the spirits. He had spent many years studying the ancient traditions and rituals of the Lakota people, and he was well respected for his wisdom and knowledge. On this particular morning, however, his thoughts were focused on the growing threat of the European-American army, which had been making incursions into Lakota territory for months. The army was led by George Armstrong Custer, a man who was known for his bravery and his disregard for the lives of Native Americans. Sitting Bull knew that the army was a force to be reckoned with, and he was determined to do everything in his power to protect his people. The tension was palpable, and the air was thick with anticipation. The tribe's warriors were on high alert, their rifles and bows at the ready, as they waited for any sign of the enemy. The women and children were busy preparing for the day, gathering food and supplies, and tending to the animals. The atmosphere was tense, but the tribe was well prepared and well organized. They had been through many battles before, and they knew what to expect. As the morning wore on, the sound of drums and chanting could be heard, as the tribe's spiritual leaders performed a ritual to protect the people and to bring them good fortune. The ritual was an ancient one, passed down through generations of Lakota people. It was a time of great spiritual power, and the tribe came together to seek the guidance and protection of the spirits. The ritual was led by Chief Sitting Bull, who was a powerful and experienced spiritual leader. He had spent many years studying the ancient traditions and rituals of the Lakota people, and he was well respected for his wisdom and knowledge. As he chanted and drummed, the rest of the tribe joined in, their voices rising and falling in a haunting melody. The ritual was a beautiful and moving experience, and it filled the tribe with a sense of peace and tranquility. But despite the sense of calm, the tension was still there, lurking just beneath the surface. The tribe knew that they were in grave danger, and they were preparing for the worst. As the ritual came to an end, the tribe began to disperse, each person returning to their daily tasks. The women and children went back to their homes, while the warriors remained on high alert, watching and waiting for any sign of the enemy. The sun was now high in the sky, casting a golden glow over the landscape. The air was warm and still, filled with the scent of blooming wildflowers and the sound of birds singing. It was a beautiful day, but the tribe knew that it could turn deadly at any moment. They were living on borrowed time, and they knew that the European-American army could attack at any moment. The tribe was ready, but they were also scared. They knew that they were outnumbered and outgunned, and they knew that their chances of survival were slim. As the day wore on, the tension continued to build, until it seemed like the very air itself was charged with anticipation. And then, just as the tribe was starting to relax, a scout rode into the camp, his face grim and his eyes wide with fear. "The army is coming," he said, his voice low and urgent. "They are just a few miles away, and they are moving fast." The tribe knew that they had to act quickly, or they would be caught off guard. They began to prepare for battle, gathering their weapons and their supplies. The women and children were evacuated to a safe location, while the warriors took up their positions. The tribe was ready to fight, and they were determined to defend their land and their way of life. As the army approached, the tribe could see the dust rising from their horses' hooves. They could hear the sound of drums and bugles, and they could see the glint of steel in the sunlight. The tribe knew that they were in for a fierce battle, and they steeled themselves for the fight. The warriors took up their positions, their rifles and bows at the ready. The women and children were safe, and the tribe was ready to defend themselves. The battle was about to begin, and the tribe was ready to fight for their lives. The sound of gunfire and screams filled the air as the tribe clashed with the European-American army. The battle was intense and chaotic, with horses and men screaming and dying all around. The tribe fought bravely, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. They were fighting for their lives, and they knew that they might not survive. As the battle raged on, the tribe began to fall back, their lines breaking under the pressure of the army's attack. The warriors were tired and wounded, and they knew that they could not hold out for much longer. The tribe was on the brink of defeat, and they knew that they had to do something drastic if they were going to survive. In the midst of the chaos, Chief Sitting Bull stood tall, his eyes fixed on the enemy lines. He was a fierce and determined leader, and he was determined to defend his people and his land. He rallied his warriors, urging them to fight on, and he led the charge against the army. The battle was fierce and intense, with both sides suffering heavy losses. But in the end, it was the tribe that emerged victorious, having successfully defended their land and their way of life. The army was defeated, and the tribe was safe, at least for the time being. As the sun began to set, the tribe began to tend to their wounded and bury their dead. They had won a great victory, but they knew that the war was far from over. The European-American army would return, and the tribe would have to be ready. But for now, they could rest and celebrate their victory. They had fought bravely, and they had defended their land and their way of life. They were proud and triumphant, and they knew that they would always stand together to defend their people and their culture. As the sun rises over the Lakota territory, Chief Sitting Bull emerges from his lodge, his eyes scanning the bustling camp. The air is filled with the smoke and roasting meat as the women prepare breakfast for their families. Sitting Bull's stomach growls with anticipation, but his mind is preoccupied with the threat of the European-American army. He knows that the army's presence in the territory is a direct result of the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868, which had promised the Lakota people ownership of the land, but had been consistently disregarded by the government. Sitting Bull walks through the camp, greeting his people as they go about their daily tasks. He stops at a nearby trading post where a merchant is selling goods such as flour, sugar, and tobacco. The merchant, a man named Greybird, is offering these goods at exorbitant prices, taking advantage of the Lakota people's desperation. Sitting Bull knows that the prices are unfair, but he also knows that his people need these goods to survive. He remembers the words of the Lakota leader, Red Cloud, who had said, "The white man's medicine is very powerful, but it is also very expensive." Sitting Bull decides to purchase a small amount of flour and sugar, using the money that he had earned from selling buffalo hides to the merchant. As he walks away from the trading post, Sitting Bull is approached by a young warrior named Gaul. Gaul is angry about the high prices at the trading post and is advocating for the Lakota people to take matters into their own hands. Sitting Bull listens to Gaul's concerns, but he also knows that violence is not the answer. He remembers the words of the great Lakota leader, Crazy Horse, who had said, "We must fight to protect our way of life, but we must also be smart and strategic." Sitting Bull tells Gaul that they must find a way to negotiate with the merchant and the government to ensure that their people are treated fairly. The two men walk to the nearby river, where they meet with other leaders to discuss the situation. They talk about the recent discovery of gold in the Black Hills, which has brought an influx of white settlers to the area. They discuss the fact that the government has failed to uphold its promises, and that the Lakota people are being forced to adapt to a new and unfamiliar way of life. Sitting Bull knows that the stakes are high, and that the decisions they make today will have a lasting impact on their people. He thinks about the words of the Lakota prophet, Wovoka, who had said, "The time of the white man is coming to an end, and the time of the Indian is beginning." As the day wears on, Sitting Bull and the other leaders come up with a plan to send a delegation to the government to negotiate for better treatment. They know that it will be a difficult task, but they are determined to fight for their rights. Sitting Bull thinks about the long history of the Lakota people and the struggles they have faced. He remembers the words of the great Lakota leader, Tatanka Iotake, who had said, "We are a proud people, and we will not be defeated." Sitting Bull knows that the road ahead will be difficult, but he is determined to lead his people to a better future. The meeting ends, and Sitting Bull returns to his lodge, his mind filled with thoughts of the challenges ahead. He knows that the European-American army is getting closer, and that the Lakota people must be prepared to defend themselves. He thinks about the words of the Lakota warrior, Rain in the Face, who had said, "We will fight to the death to protect our land and our way of life." Sitting Bull knows that the stakes are high, and that the decisions they make today will have a lasting impact on their people. He lies down on his bed, his eyes fixed on the ceiling, his mind racing with thoughts of the future. The sound of children playing outside his lodge is a welcome distraction from the worries that weigh on his mind. Sitting Bull listens to their laughter and smiles, remembering the words of the Lakota elder, Fool's Crow, who had said, "The children are our future, and we must do everything in our power to protect them." He knows that the Lakota people have always been a resilient and resourceful people, and that they will find a way to thrive in the face of adversity. As he drifts off to sleep, Sitting Bull's mind is filled with thoughts of the challenges ahead, but he is determined to lead his people to a better future. The sound of the wind outside his lodge is a reminder of the vast and beautiful land that the Lakota people call home, and Sitting Bull knows that he will do everything in his power to protect it. As the sun reaches its peak in the summer sky, the Lakota people gather for their midday meal, a time to rest and refuel after a morning of hunting and gathering. In the village, the smell of roasting buffalo meat wafts through the air, enticing everyone with its savory aroma. The women have prepared a traditional dish called wasna, a mixture of dried buffalo meat, berries, and fat, which they serve with a side of wild turnips and camas roots. This hearty meal provides the necessary energy for the warriors to continue their preparations for the impending battle against the European-American army. The calorie count of this meal is substantial, with a single serving of wasna providing approximately 500 calories, along with essential vitamins and minerals. The buffalo meat, rich in protein, is a staple of the Lakota diet, and the berries add a burst of antioxidants and flavor. The fat, often rendered from the buffalo, provides a rich source of energy, essential for the physical demands of hunting and warfare. According to the accounts of George Catlin, a European-American artist who lived among the Lakota, a typical meal for a warrior consisted of a piece of dried meat, a few berries, and a handful of parched corn. This simple yet nourishing diet allowed the warriors to maintain their strength and endurance, even in the face of scarcity and hardship. As the villagers eat, they discuss the latest news from the nearby fort, where the European-American army is gathering its forces. The Lakota leaders, including Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse, have been monitoring the situation closely, aware of the threat that the army poses to their way of life. The Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868, which established the boundaries of the Lakota territory, has been repeatedly violated by the European Americans, who continue to encroach on Native American lands in search of gold and other resources. This has led to a significant scarcity of food and resources, as the buffalo herds are dwindling and the land is being taken over by European American settlers. The meal is interrupted by the arrival of a messenger, who brings news of a recent skirmish between the Lakota warriors and a group of European American soldiers. The messenger reports that the soldiers, led by George Armstrong Custer, have been spotted near the Little Bighorn River and that they are preparing to launch a full-scale attack on the Lakota village. This news sends a wave of concern through the village as the warriors realize that they must be prepared to defend their homes and families against the impending attack. According to the accounts of Red Cloud, a prominent Lakota leader, the European American army has been known to attack Native American villages without warning, killing women and children indiscriminately. As the villagers finish their meal, they begin to make preparations for the battle ahead. The women gather their children and pack essential supplies, such as food, water, and blankets, in case they need to flee the village quickly. The warriors, meanwhile, check their weapons and horses, making sure that they are ready to ride into battle at a moment's notice. The air is tense with anticipation, as the Lakota people wait for the European American army to make its next move. The sound of drums and chanting can be heard in the distance as the warriors prepare themselves for the fight ahead, their hearts filled with a mix of fear, determination, and courage. In the midst of this tension, Sitting Bull takes a moment to reflect on the wisdom of his ancestors, who taught him the importance of living in harmony with nature and respecting the traditions of his people. He remembers the words of his grandfather, who told him that the land is our mother, and we must take care of her, just as she takes care of us. This wisdom guides him as he prepares to face the European American army, and he knows that he must do everything in his power to protect his people and their way of life. As the sun begins to set, casting a golden glow over the village, the Lakota people steel themselves for the battle ahead, their hearts filled with a deep sense of purpose and resolve. The village is filled with the sound of activity as the warriors prepare for battle and the women pack their belongings. The smell of smoke and sweat hangs in the air as the villagers work together to prepare for the impending attack. The sound of horses whinnying and the clanging of metal can be heard in the distance as the warriors mount their horses and prepare to ride into battle. The atmosphere is tense and foreboding as the villagers wait for the European American army to make its next move. According to the accounts of Wovoka, a prominent Native American leader, the European American army has been known to use tactics such as scorched earth and total war, leaving nothing but destruction and devastation in its wake. As the evening wears on, the villagers gather round the fire to share stories and sing traditional songs. The music is haunting and beautiful, filled with a deep sense of longing and nostalgia. The villagers sing of their ancestors who fought and died to protect their land and way of life. They sing of the buffalo, which once roamed the plains in vast herds, providing sustenance and shelter for the Lakota people. The music is a reminder of the rich cultural heritage of the Lakota people and the importance of preserving their traditions and way of life. As the night wears on, the villagers retire to their lodges, their hearts filled with a sense of determination and courage, ready to face whatever challenges lie ahead. The
darkness is filled with the sound of crickets and the distant howling of wolves as the villagers drift off to sleep, their dreams filled with visions of the battle to come. The stars twinkle above, casting a silver glow over the village as the Lakota people wait for the dawn when they will face the European American army and fight for their freedom and way of life. The air is cool and crisp, filled with the scent of sage and sweetgrass as the villagers sleep, their hearts filled with a deep sense of purpose and resolve. As the night wears on, the villagers are unaware of the fate that awaits them, but they are prepared to face whatever challenges lie ahead, armed with their courage, determination, and the wisdom of their ancestors.
As the afternoon sun casts a warm glow over the Lakota village, the gathering places come alive with the sound of murmured conversations and the aroma of roasting meats. The villagers, still reeling from the news of the impending attack by the European American army, gather to discuss the latest developments and share what little information they have. Greybird, a respected elder, speaks of the recent execution of the Hunkpapa chief, Rain in the Face, who was accused of killing a European-American trader. He was hanged on October 10, 1875, in the town of Bismarck, Greybird says, his voice laced with concern. It is a stark reminder of the dangers we face when dealing with the Wasichu. The conversation turns to the recent passage of the Indian Appropriations Act of 1876, which has effectively terminated the tribe's rights to their ancestral lands. It is a law that seeks to erase our very way of life, says Sitting Bull, his voice filled with a deep sense of foreboding. We must be vigilant and prepared to defend our lands against those who seek to take them from us. The villagers nod in agreement, their faces etched with worry and determination. As the discussion continues, the topic of the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868 comes up, and the villagers debate the merits of the treaty and its impact on their lives. Red Cloud, a respected leader, speaks of the treaty's provisions and the promises made by the European American government. They promised us that our lands would be protected and that we would be allowed to live in peace, Red Cloud says, his voice tinged with sadness. But we all know that those promises have been broken time and time again. The villagers nod in agreement, their voices filled with a sense of betrayal and frustration. The conversation is interrupted by the arrival of a young messenger, who brings news of a recent skirmish between the Lakota warriors and a group of European-American soldiers. The soldiers were led by George Armstrong Custer, the messenger says, his voice breathless with excitement. They were defeated, but we know that they will return, and next time they will not be so easily defeated. The villagers look at each other, their faces set with determination, knowing that the threat of the European-American army is real and that they must be prepared to defend themselves. As the afternoon wears on, the villagers continue to discuss the latest developments and share what little information they have. They speak of the recent outbreak of cholera in the nearby village and the efforts of the medicine men to contain the disease. They talk of the scarcity of food and the difficulties of hunting in the face of the European-American army's presence. The conversations are filled with a sense of urgency and concern, as the villagers know that their very way of life is under threat. As the sun begins to set, the villagers slowly disperse, each one lost in their own thoughts and concerns. Sitting Bull remains, sitting in silence, his eyes fixed on the horizon. He knows that the days ahead will be filled with danger and uncertainty, but he is determined to lead his people through the storm. The sound of the wind rustling through the grass and the distant call of a bird are the only sounds that break the silence as the villagers retire to their homes, their hearts heavy with the knowledge of what is to come. The stars begin to twinkle in the night sky, and the village is bathed in a soft lunar glow. The silence is almost palpable, as if the very fate of the village hangs in the balance. Sitting Bull rises, his movements slow and deliberate, and walks to the edge of the village. He looks out into the darkness, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of danger. The wind whispers through the grass, carrying the whispers of the ancestors, and Sitting Bull listens, his heart filled with a deep sense of purpose and determination.
The night air is filled with the scent of blooming wildflowers, and the sound of crickets provides a soothing background hum as the village waits with bated breath for the dawn of a new day. and the uncertain future that it will bring.
As the sun sets over the Lakota village, the air cools and the sounds of the day give way to the quiet of evening. The mortality rate among the Lakota people is high, with an average lifespan of just 35 years, according to the estimates of Dr. Charles Eastman, a Santee Sioux physician who worked among the Lakota. The typical household owns few possessions, perhaps a buffalo hide tent, some woven baskets, and a few tools made from stone or bone. Graybird, a young warrior, sits by the fire, his eyes fixed on the flames as he thinks about the events of the day. The Indian Appropriations Act of 1876 has cut off all funding for the Lakota, leaving them to struggle for survival. The dangers of night in this time and place are real, with crime rates and fire risks ever present. The village has already experienced several fires in recent months, and the risk of disease vectors such as smallpox and cholera is always a concern. The Lakota have developed a system of sentries to watch for potential threats, but the risks remain. As Graybird gazes into the fire, he thinks about the words of Sitting Bull, who earlier in the day spoke of the need for the Lakota to remain vigilant and prepared for battle. The Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868, which established the Lakota Territory, is under threat, and the European American Army is closing in. According to the treaty, the Lakota are entitled to 60 million acres of land, but the government has consistently failed to uphold its obligations. Sitting Bull himself sits in his lodge, lost in thought as he ponders the challenges facing his people. He knows that the Lakota are not just fighting for their land, but for their very way of life. The European Americans bring with them diseases to which the Lakota have no immunity, and their guns and cannons are far superior to the Lakota's bows and arrows. The Battle of Little Bighorn, which took place on June 25, 1876, was a significant victory for the Lakota, but it also marked the beginning of a long and bloody campaign by the European Americans to crush the Lakota resistance. As Sitting Bull thinks about the future, he is aware of the words of the great Lakota leader Red Cloud, who once said, "They made us many promises, more than I can remember, but they never kept but one. They promised to take our land, and they took it." The evening wears on, and the villagers begin to settle in for the night. The sound of laughter and conversation carries through the air, but there is an undercurrent of tension and uncertainty. The Lakota know that they are living in a time of great change and upheaval, and they are not sure what the future holds. As they drift off to sleep, they are aware of the dangers that lurk in the darkness, from the risk of attack by the European Americans to the ever-present threat of disease and hunger. But they are also aware of their own strength and resilience, and they know that they will face whatever challenges come their way with courage and determination. According to the accounts of Father Pierre-Jean de Smet, a Jesuit missionary who worked among the Lakota, the villagers are deeply devoted to their traditional way of life, and they will fight to preserve it. As the night deepens, the village grows quiet, the only sound the distant howling of wolves and the occasional hoot of an owl. The stars twinkle above, a reminder of the vast and mysterious universe that lies beyond the struggles and challenges of the Lakota people. In this moment, the villagers are connected to something greater than themselves, a sense of community and tradition that stretches back generations. As they sleep, they are unaware of the events that will unfold in the days and weeks to come, but they are prepared to face whatever challenges come their way, armed with their courage, their resilience, and their deep connection to the land and their way of life.
The words of Sitting Bull, spoken earlier in the day, echo in their minds. "I have killed, robbed, and injured too many men, women, and children to have any right to a quiet death."
As the last remnants of sunlight faded beyond the horizon, the Lakota village settled into the darkness of night, the only sound being the distant howling of wolves and the occasional bark of a dog. The year was 1876, and the village was on high alert, with watchmen posted at regular intervals to warn of any potential threats from the European American Army. These watchmen, paid a wage of $5 per month, were the first line of defense against the dangers that lurked in the darkness. According to the accounts of Dr. Charles Eastman, a Santee Dakota physician who lived among the Lakota, the watchmen were responsible for protecting the village from not only external threats, but also from internal dangers, such as fires and accidents. As the night wore on, the villagers retired to their homes, exhausted from a day of preparations for the impending battle. The women, who had spent the day gathering food and tending to their families, now sat by the fires, sewing and repairing clothing for the warriors. The men, who had spent the day hunting and gathering intelligence, now sat in council, discussing the best course of action to take against the enemy. Greybird, a young warrior, sat among them, his eyes fixed on the fire as he listened to the words of the elders. The Indian Appropriations Act of 1876, which had cut off all funding to the Lakota people, had left them struggling to survive, and the village was on the brink of starvation. As Red Cloud, a respected leader, would later say, "The act was a death sentence for our people, and we were forced to fight for our very survival." In the midst of this tense and uncertain atmosphere, the villagers were also aware of the dangers that lurked in the darkness. The lack of adequate lighting and the presence of wild animals made it a perilous time to be outdoors. According to historical records, the mortality rate for women in childbirth was staggeringly high, with some estimates suggesting that up to 20% of mothers did not survive. Midwives, who attended to these women, worked tirelessly to save lives, often under difficult and unsanitary conditions. As the night wore on, the villagers were aware of the risks that their women faced, and the midwives worked through the night, attending to the needs of their patients. The accounts of women like Suzette Laflèche, an Omaha Indian who worked as a teacher and a nurse, provide a glimpse into the challenges faced by these midwives and the importance of their work. As the hours passed, the village grew quieter, the only sound being the occasional cry of a child or the rustling of leaves in the wind. The watchmen continued their vigil, scanning the horizon for any sign of danger. The villagers, exhausted from the day's activities, slept fitfully, their dreams haunted by the specter of war and violence. In the stillness of the night, the weight of their situation hung heavy over the village, a constant reminder of the dangers that lay ahead. As the historian D. Brown would later write, the Battle of Little Bighorn was a turning point in the history of the American West, and the Lakota people were at the forefront of the struggle for their land and their way of life. As the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, the villagers stirred, their bodies tired, but their spirits resolute. They knew that the day ahead would bring its own set of challenges and dangers, but they were ready to face them head-on. The watchmen, who had stood guard throughout the night, were relieved by a new set of guards, who took up their positions with a quiet determination. The village, though still and quiet, was a hive of activity, as the people prepared for the day ahead, their hearts heavy with the knowledge of what was to come. As the sun rose over the village, the people emerged from their homes, their faces set with a determination to survive and to thrive in the face of overwhelming odds.
The words of Sitting Bull, spoken just a few days before, still echoed in their minds. "I will fight to the end, and I will never surrender." The villagers began their daily routines, the women starting the fires and preparing the morning meal, while the men checked their weapons and readied themselves for the day ahead. The children, who had slept fitfully, now ran and played, their laughter and shouts filling the air. The village, though on the brink of war, was still a place of life and laughter, a place where people lived and loved and struggled to survive. As the day wore on, the villagers would face many challenges, but for now they were at peace, their spirits buoyed by the knowledge that they were together and that they would face whatever lay ahead as a community. The historian George Hyde would later write, "The Lakota people were a resilient and resourceful people, and they would stop to nothing to protect their land and their way of life." As the morning sun rose higher in the sky, the villagers continued their preparations, their movements swift and purposeful. The warriors, who had spent the previous day gathering intelligence, now sat in council, discussing the best course of action to take against the enemy. The women, who had spent the day gathering food and tending to their families, now worked to prepare the village for the impending battle. The children, who had played and laughed just hours before, now sat quietly, their eyes fixed on the faces of their parents, their hearts filled with a sense of wonder and fear. The village, though on the brink of war, was still a place of hope and resilience, a place where people came together to support and protect one another.
As the historian Robert Utley would later write, the Battle of Little Bighorn was a testament to the bravery and resilience of the Lakota people, and it would go down in history as one of the greatest victories of the American Indian Wars. As the sun rose higher in the sky, the villagers continued their preparations, their movements swift and purposeful. The warriors, who had spent the previous day gathering intelligence, now sat in council, discussing the best course of action to take against the enemy. The women, who had spent the day gathering food and tending to their families, now worked to prepare the village for the impending battle. The children, who had played and laughed just hours before, now sat quietly, their eyes fixed on the faces of their parents, their hearts filled with a sense of wonder and fear. The village, though on the brink of war, was still a place of hope and resilience, a place where people came together to support and protect one another. As the historian Robert Utley would later write, the Battle of Little Bighorn was a testament to the bravery and resilience of the Lakota people, and it would go down in history as one of the greatest victories of the American Indian Wars.
As the night deepens, the village of Chief Sitting Bull falls into a fitful sleep, the watchman's eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of danger. The year is 1876, and the Indian Appropriations Act has just been passed, allocating $1.2 million for the civilization of Native Americans. This era, marked by forced assimilation and violence, will last for decades, affecting over 300,000 Native Americans. The legacy of Sitting Bull and his people will be one of resilience and determination as they fight to preserve their way of life in the face of overwhelming odds. By the time the Indian Appropriations Act is repealed in 1934, the Native American population will have declined by nearly 40%, from approximately 400,000 to 250,000. The impact of this era will be felt for centuries to come, shaping the course of American history and the lives of generations to come. As the last candle flickers out, the world grows quiet, the only sound the distant howl of a wolf, a reminder of the wild and unforgiving landscape that has been the backdrop for this epic struggle. In the end, it is not the battles or the treaties that will be remembered, but the everyday struggles and triumphs of people like Sitting Bull, who lived and died in a time of great upheaval and change. The darkness closes in, and the village is lost in the silence of the night. But the story of Chief Sitting Bull and his people will live on, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit.